Wallace and Imagery, the planet Trilithon as it stands in relation to the bad thing. Hey everyone, I wanted to take a little bit of time and make a short video looking a little bit more closely at imagery in this particular story from last week. Wallace is the planet Trilithon as it stands in relation to the bad thing. I would like to do more of these videos. They're kind of time consuming, more in the planning than they are in the actual creation. But I think it will be nice in the future to be able to do this, especially after you have read a story and kind of taken a quiz over it and you're familiar with the story, so that I can look a little bit more closely at the particular element or focus of a module, just to give you a little insight into the way I see the material in the module playing out in the story. And I don't think these would be very effective if I did them before the fact, especially not being in class with people and not knowing, whether people read the stories before watching the video, etc. So to get started, I want to look in particular at one paragraph, and it's clear to you now, having read this, you get a sense of what kind of writer Wallace is. He's often kind of known as a maximalist writer, so someone who tries to include a ton of information, even just linguistic information. So forgetting all the things that we might look at in specific for this paragraph, just think about the length of this paragraph. And I'm going to start on this paragraph. It's on 28 of the actual PDF. It's maybe like page 5 of the story or something, but it starts with, "I really don't know if the bad thing is really depression." But notice how long this paragraph is, and his paragraphs in general. You get a sense of what his writing is like. And he's particularly famous for writing a novel called Infinite Jest, which was very popular in the mid-90s. It's like 1,200 pages, incredibly dense, maximalist novel, really complicated and long, but a wonderful book. Anyway, to return to the story, so this paragraph begins with this not knowing whether the bad thing is really depression, and I'm actually going to kind of keep in mind the tips to analyze imagery from the previous chapter. So just a few of those steps. The first is just to identify the type of figures of speech, the types of images and their role in the description, and then to try to compare and contrast those or examine them in a deeper way and think about their accuracy in the particular description, and what is the role of using those images, what is the end product, what's the result for the reader, and then critiquing those and seeing how they kind of all work together, so how they demonstrate actual meanings in the context and for the setting, etc., for the story. So I want to just focus on a couple pieces of this text. Hopefully I can do it in one video. If not, we'll see. But both of these, if I do more than one video, they'll both be rather short. So, and I'll read kind of chunks of these and then go into depth with them as we go. So to start with, I really don't know if the bad thing is really depression. I had previously sort of always thought that depression was just sort of really intense sadness, like what you feel when your very good dog dies, or when Bambi's mother gets killed in Bambi. So I'll just stop there. A couple of things stand out. The first is with the diction right away, and this is going to come up over and over. And diction just means word choice. So all images are diction. All writing is diction in a very real way. Notice the use of sort of. So as an English teacher, I would say this is probably unnecessary repetition. We have the words sort of appearing twice in 2 lines. But there's a real method to doing this, and it brings us to the first bit of figurative language, which is understatement. So when we say something is sort of blank, well, it's sort of blue, it's sort of green, it's sort of hot outside, it's sort of cold. That's a qualifier on whatever particular adjective we are using after sort of, right, or even a noun, so that something becomes a little bit less than that. And we need to think about what the effect is of doing that. So, we need to think about fiction, and just as we did with poetry, these people make very determined decisions about the words that they use, their syntax, so the order in which they use them, the meanings behind them, and they do things on purpose. Things are not accidental, things are not unplanned. There's a lot of revision that goes into all of these kinds of writing. So, why do that? Maybe I'll come back to this idea, but I think this understatement is one of the features of this particular story, and really Wallace in general. This attention to and use of understatement to qualify things that are said, and it's maybe used in several different ways, but we'll note it and we'll move on. The next piece to kind of point out here, as far as image goes, is that allusion, that reference to Bambi's mother getting killed in Bambi. If you don't know, Bambi is super old, even by an old guy like me. By my standards, it's old. Disney movie. Bambi is a fawn, like a baby deer. And as you can imagine, for deer get killed, and Bambi's mother dies in the Disney movie, and it's an animated film. And we are meant to feel sad in the audience. So there's another bit of figurative language, right? The allusion, the reference to a particular film. And in the line before, there's even that when your very good dog dies, right? So there we get not just a visual imagery of a very good dog, and that it's not much of a visual imagery. It's probably more meant to evoke emotion. It's not your bad dog that dies; it's your very good dog that dies. And it's kind of nice when you think about it, because we can look at a dog and think, oh well, that looks like a good dog, or that looks like a bad dog. And when we say things like that, they're based on all kinds of cultural things about what we understand about dogs or know about dogs, and the breeds that we were exposed to throughout our lives that make us more or less prone to see certain dogs as being good or bad. But when we add very good dog dies and your very good dog, we personalize that dog. And note too that he doesn't give a specific breed, right? A specific breed could fall prey to the individual reader having an experience in which they had a negative experience with something like a Cocker Spaniel. So people with a negative experience with a Cocker Spaniel are prone to not seeing Cocker Spaniels as good dogs. So by leaving the word dog as a general descriptor and not having a specific breed, he kind of prevents the reader from having a negative connotation. So it's a really interesting, just like thing that you probably pass right over when you're reading. But our goal here is to think really closely about the way really specific words work for readers, the way they communicate ideas, and the way writers work to affect their audiences. So to go on. Again, we're talking about the bad thing being depression. He starts this paragraph with, I really don't know if the bad thing is really depression. Again, notice the repetition even in that line. But to go down, I thought that it was that you frowned or maybe even cried a little bit if you were a girl and said, holy cow, I'm really depressed here. And then your friends, if you have any, come and cheer you up and take you out and get you plowed. And in the morning, it's like a faded color. And in a couple days, it's gone altogether. The bad thing, which I guess is what is really depression, is very different and indescribably worse. I guess I should say rather sort of indescribably, because I've heard different people try to describe real depression over the last couple years. A very glib guy on television said, and I'll stop there. So much going on just in this tiny piece. Notice that the paragraph starts with, I really don't know if the bad thing is really depression. So it starts with this doubt about defining the bad thing. Obviously, there's a sense in which the bad thing is depression, right? Especially if you've read this story, you know. The bad thing is depression. And even the speaker of this knows the bad thing is depression. So the character narrating this story knows the bad thing is depression. They're inserting this bit of doubt. And that's another thing, right? That's where those qualifiers really, the word really, come in to sort of hedge against a particular word or a descriptor. And the effect there is, you can see it here, is to produce doubt, right? To increase the uncertainty. Then if we skip down a few lines, the bad thing, which I guess is what is really depression, is very different and indescribably worse. So in these 9-10 lines, we've got a shift, right? At first, I really don't know if the bad thing is really depression. All this stuff about Bambi and the very good dog and this girl who says I'm really depressed. These examples aren't quite enough, right? These examples don't actually do a great job of defining depression, or at least signifying this doubt about the definition of depression. And so this next mention of the bad thing is then followed with, well, I guess it really is depression. So, one of the things when we're analyzing imagery, we want to think about the connection between the very small examples of imagery, how they all kind of work together, and then how they're connected to the work as a whole. So what they're lending from their really small usage, like they're a single brick in a big wall that is one wall in an entire building. How does the one brick make the building? And I think here you get an example of that, because that doubt, that inability to be certain, is something that punctuates this entire story and really becomes the primary feature of it. This is a deeply insecure, mentally troubled person, a troubled little soldier, as the narrator would say. And even in these small examples of imagery, we get to see the whole. So the tiny piece becomes indicative of the broader work as a whole. If we keep going on, we get these descriptions about real depression. So the very glib guy on television said some people liken it to being underwater. So the imagery, a comparison, but also we've got like the physical, we're sensing what it might be like underwater, and that goes on, a body of water that has no surface. So what is a body of water with no surface? So you're underwater, right? Imagine being underwater in like a pool or something. And you can look up and you can see, that kind of almost hallucinatory image of sky and sun on the other side of the surface of water. And if you think about it, there's a certain comfort to that, right? You can reach the air. However, if we remove that level, if we remove that surface, it becomes incredibly heavy, right? There is essentially no escape. As Wallace says here, there will only be more water. No matter what direction you go, there will only be more water, no fresh air, and freedom of movement, just restriction and suffocation, and no light. So that image is